Have you ever wondered where good ideas come from? If you find yourself just struggling to be able to develop ideas and concepts, or even often are just comparing yourself with others, don't worry, you're not alone. In fact, studies talk about this matter altogether, and in particular, why many of us are feeling with this notion of imposter syndrome. It seems to be very common that a lot of us go out there and have this attitude of fake it until we make it. What is it that's driving this? And the negative aspect is, it is preventing many of us from being able to start the ventures or any other content that we're interested in. Now keep in mind, there are many factors that contribute to the generation of great ideas. And today we're going to have a 4-part discussion on some theories and insights on where great ideas come from and how they're generated. Now part 1 is about how practice makes perfect. Part 2, we go into the collective mindset. Part 3 is about to be open and ready to fail. And part 4 is a bonus section on how nothing is original and everything is a remix. And first we're going to start with this notion of practice makes perfect. And to begin with, it's important to understand that creativity is not something that was just bestowed on the select few. It's not something we're born with. It's not an innate ability. It's something that's nurtured and manifests over time. In fact, many creative geniuses attribute their success to hard work and practice that just went into their craft. And I'm sure many of you have heard about this notion of 10,000 hours of any particular task to be able to contribute to mastery of that skill. And in fact, this idea was first popularized by psychologist Anderson Erickson. And what he had found is that the most successful experts had just put in thousands of hours of time into their fields to be able to reach their level of expertise. Now, and I just want to take point to this 10,000 hour rule, yes, there's merit to it, but it's not something that we have to measure to be precise. It is basically a guideline to be able to give us somewhere to go and just know this concept. If we do want to master something, we have to put in the time, practice, and diligence to be able to achieve that skill set. And I think this part is very valid, in particular when it comes to each of us as individuals. We're all different, our brains think different. I can always look back to my time in university to where there were people who had, let's say, an unfair advantage. They had already had those many hours before drawing, and in my case, I didn't have a lot of art skills. So I had to start from square one to be able to develop what I needed in my field. Or those who had just been drawing, whether it was for fun or they had taken formal classes, they had a leg or two ahead of me. So once again, let's not compare ourselves to others, and let's just step forward knowing that we will gradually increase over time. And I would say this leads us to why it's important in general for us to just be able to create those essential habits. And if we take this time to strategically set time away and be purposeful in terms of what we're using our time on, and that can be with a matter of things, whether from brainstorming, concept sketching, just ideas, just throwing it out there. I think these short bursts is something that helps us get past the initial kind of angst periods that we all may struggle with, or at least I do. And what will happen is over time, as we've put in the hours, put in the exercise, our mental muscles, they're going to develop, and then we're going to be able to think a little bit more rapid, creatively, and our skill of tool sets essentially is going to grow. And from that, we'll be able to generate these ideas because we would have put in the time of cramming prior knowledge inside there. And this is going to lead us into part number 2, the collective mindset. Now, and one thing that I want to put out there, because we just talked about putting in this time and hours, but it isn't all on you. And there is this major misconception about the fact that in life, we have these lone wolf geniuses. And this is not true at all. I mean, we can think of them. You have Mozart, Einstein, even modern day Steve Jobs. And they're credited for these masterpieces that they create. However, the finished work in these masterpieces are almost never a result of a single person. Often there's a collective of individuals that are operating in the background. They may be editing, they may be brainstorming. Granted, that first person may have the big picture idea, but it does take the team to be able to refine it and process it. And what I find interesting is this notion of the collective, or even the invisible hand, as sometimes I like to refer to it. You have most often a collective of group of people who've had different experiences in their life that may come from different professional expertises, and the shaping from all the various people adds a richness to this that it wouldn't have happened if some form of art or a building or, let's say, a piece of photography or an article, if it was only coming through the mindset and lens of one individual, it wouldn't reach the same levels, because we do need content to come from a collective of people, because there are many people of us who are looking and we can be looking at things and analyzing it to try to understand what connects for me. What connects for me may not for others. To that end, that is where the collective actually helps elevate these pieces of mastery into something that's beautiful as what we know today. And one thing that's recently stuck with me in the book Show Your Work by Austin Kleon is, in life, and in particular within the creative industry, there's this notion of the genius. And what the genius is, as musician Brian Eno attributes it, is the fact of what we're talking about here. That ideas aren't coming from the individuals. Instead, that great ideas often come from the collective instead. Now, I can make the comparison about how a genius relates in an architectural field. Many of us may be familiar with Frank Gehry, very famous Walt Disney Concert Hall, Bilbao Museum. It's a lot of fluid style sculptural looking buildings. Now Frank Gehry is what we refer to as the principal architect. He's essentially the head of the firm. What Frank does, and what is often actually kind of joked about within the architectural community, is that he takes a piece of paper and wads it up, throws it out, and then voila, there's the beautiful building and sculpture. We know things are a bit more complicated than that. And in fact, Frank has attributed his to the whimsical nature, working with the arts. But it isn't just him. He does have this initial idea, and then beyond him, basically as the maestro, is how I'd like to think of it. He delivers the overarching idea and thought, and then you have his designers within the firm. So you may have like 50 to 100 people that are working on countless projects. Maybe on one he's got 5 or 10 that are primarily concerned on one project. You may even have 5 or 10 that are just working on one particular detail to be able to support those beautiful shapes and curves that he ends up putting out there. But essentially, these individuals, they take that concept, they refine it, they work it through, develop it through design, get it in through permitting, go back and forth, make sure everything's code compliant, and then from there we go into the construction, talking, working with contractors, because for anybody who doesn't know, design is about an idea, but you got to work with the people who build it as well. So that is an important part of the creation of anything. You have the thinkers and the doers, and it's the combination of all of us to be able to make that happen. And finally, after the contractors and craftsmen have finished their fine-tuning and made this the wonderful piece that we all know, then is when the public and all of us are able to experience this masterpiece. Now, and I would say the goal or the intent of what we're talking about here is to be able to shift our mindsets. So to take it away from this notion of only being the individual and be part of the genius, be part of that collective. So then that way you're not out there trying to be able to create things and have people serve you, and you're shifting that perspective. So then you're thinking about how you're able to help others and serve them, which I think is just a positive outlook on life. And one of the reasons even I went into the field of architecture was to put out content and to put out products and buildings and environments that just to make the world a better place for others. All right, part number 4 is about being open-minded and ready to fail. Now, this is another theory that goes into this notion about how creativity flourishes in environments where we're able to experiment and take risk. And basically, if we can't take risk, how are we ever going to succeed? And what we do need to be able to accept is that when we do take a risk, obviously there's going to be opportunity for failure. Failure is a good thing. Don't feel bad. It happens. Embrace it. It is not something that we should shine away from. Because often if we don't look out there and try to fail, we don't even take the step to begin with. And failure isn't something that just novices. Many successful people, they talk about how they have continuously gone through the failure motion throughout all of their career, from the beginning to the end. And this can be somebody who's just starting out to someone who's been around for 30, 40 years in their field. And it's also important to realize that it's not just about taking risks, it's about having the right mindset too. There's this notion that ignorance is bliss, and because if you don't know better, you are able to challenge things more and question it. Often we get caught up into this concept of this is the way to do it, this is the standards, it's been that way forever. This isn't true. Our modern history is short. Now, and it is people who are open-minded and willing to put themselves out there and just challenge conventional wisdom that are able to create groundbreaking ideas. Now, a theme that I've often heard about in a podcast I listened to by Guy Raz, How I Built This, they go into a lot of stories from entrepreneurs, and basically they talk about their trials and tribulations as they went to create their companies. And most often, many of them didn't know what they're doing. And the story that stuck with me was the one about founder of Southwest Airlines, Herb Kelleher. And it talked about how he was not somebody who was experienced in the commercial aviation industry. And in fact, because of that, he questioned more about why things were done the way they were. And Herb, he's celebrated to this day as a pioneer for his disruptive business model. And in many business schools even, they look to him as the case study of what to emulate for a successful way to create something. And if there was anything that we were to take away from Herb, it's his golden rule. It's okay to break the rules. And I would actually say it's best if we break the rules. And essentially the lesson to take from here, if something doesn't make sense to you, then we need to question it, challenge it, and be sure to get out there and revise that. Because if the rule doesn't make sense, then it's a bad rule. All right, and the final theory we're gonna talk about today is nothing is original and everything is a remix. And this idea about everything not being original, I'll say it's genuinely life-changing, because for a lot of time, there was this self-constrained feeling that I had to be able to create something out of thin air. But in fact, great ideas are often just the manifestation of what has come before us. Now I can go out there and just look at what others have done and get that inspiration and package it together to be able to see what works for me. And we are going to go deeper into this topic in this video over here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in that video where we'll talk about part 4, nothing is original and everything is a remix. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you later. Take care.